Peace, peace, peace. It's Rakeem with Dome, and today's bill is just a quick bill about the racist origins of marijuana laws in America. And so I want to give Natalie Papillion the credit and the props for her research. That's what this presentation is built off of, her research. So if you're interested in the topic more, definitely Google Natalie Papillion. She has mad research when it comes to the origins of the war on drugs in America and the racism behind it. So Harry J. Anslinger was the commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. He was actually the founding commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. And here's what he says. He said that reefer makes darkies think they're as good as white men. The primary reason to outlaw marijuana is its effects on the degenerate races. So even he's telling you that marijuana prohibition is due to racism, even though he probably didn't think what he was saying was racist. He's telling you out of his own mouth that marijuana prohibition is created, in his words, to outlaw the effect on the degenerate races. Natalie Papillion says, the truth is cannabis was criminalized largely because one man felt it threatened a rigid, racially stratified social order that kept him and his associates at the very top. Behind modern-day marijuana prohibition involves discredited doctors, Louis Armstrong, the 21st Amendment, and good old-fashioned state-sponsored propaganda, but it's mostly about Harry Anslinger, a powerful mid-century bureaucrat whose racism, professional anxieties, and all-consuming hatred of jazz fueled the beginning of our country's anti-cannabis crusade. And so this picture is a quote of Harry Anslinger, and what he says, coloreds with big lips lure white women with jazz and marijuana. So this is part of the state-sponsored propaganda that she's talking about, is he's appealing to the racism of America. And, you know, using the old racist trope that it makes white women more susceptible to talk to black men. You know what I'm saying? So it's wild, but this is our origin of our marijuana laws in America. Harry Anslinger also says, I wish I could show you what a small marijuana cigarette can do to our degenerate Spanish-speaking residents. That's why our problem is so great. The greatest percentage of our population is composed of Spanish-speaking persons, most of all who are low mentally. He also says there are 100,000 total marijuana smokers in the U.S., and most are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz, and swing result from marijuana use. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relationships with Negroes, entertainers, and any others. So they're letting you know their own insecurities and their own inferiority complexes with the laws that they create. Natalie goes on to say, marijuana quickly became popular amongst Southern Black communities, a population whose growing economic, cultural, and electoral power was simultaneously threatening to upend the region's racially stratified social order. Around the same time, the Mexican Revolution resulted an uptick in Mexican immigration into the U.S. Southwest. Wealthy white Americans saw cannabis as a tool they could exploit to consolidate their influence and bolster their political power. They decided to highlight cannabis consumption and popular pastime in Mexican American communities as evidence of the degeneracy of the new Spanish-speaking residents. In fact, politicians were so hell-bent on pushing this narrative that they began eschewing the term cannabis, which was familiar to Anglo-Americans, in favor of local weed and a more foreign-sounding marijuana. So the name marijuana itself is racist in origins and was used to create panic among whites, you know what I'm saying, and give it that a feel of this is a black or Mexican, in this case, a Mexican drug, you know what I'm saying? these xenophobes were so shameless, they went so far as to add the J in the effort to make the word marijuana seem even more Mexican. The way the US government and American public saw it, the increasing enfranchisement of the Black South, especially with coupled with the rapidly changing demographics of the American Southwest, was started to pose a real threat to the country's rigid caste system. These racial anxieties quickly manifested a successful, long-lasting federal effort to demonize cannabis and criminalize its Black and brown consumers. By the time that 18th Amendment rolled around, the genre's expanded reach saw these Black jazz musicians playing in speakeasies and social clubs of Prohibition era Chicago, Detroit, and New York. There, to Anslinger's great horror, they performed for mixed audiences, socialites, movie stars, recent immigrants, and recently bobbed young women. After work, these Black men would head back to Harlem, where, flush with cash, grass, and disregard for the country's racial caste system, their very existence was a treatment to the societal shifts that would come to define the decade. If jazz embodied the spirit of the age, its performance served as living, breathing examples of the era, increasingly egalitarian impulses. To bigoted individuals like Anslinger, people like Louis Armstrong were a threat to public order. After all, they'd already started to create cracks in the country's racially codified caste system, and the genre's growing popularity seemed to signal even bigger changes on the horizon. To preserve his own position, Anslinger realized he'd have to give the American public good reason to resist these changing demographics, and someone or something would have to be held responsible. Louis Armstrong even had songs about cannabis, you know what I'm saying? And what you have to realize about jazz back in the day, it was seen the same way Public Enemy was seen in the 80s. You know what I'm saying? It was the same type of vibe. However, the repeal of the 18th Amendment threatened to wreck the man's professional ambitions. After all, without a controlled substance to police, Anslinger and his colleagues would soon be out of a job. The 21st Amendment, which ended alcohol prohibition, threatened to end his career before it even really began. Fortunately for Anslinger, it also devoted with shifting demographics and the rise of jazz. So it's saying here that when the 21st Amendment, which ended alcohol prohibition, happened, they needed a boogeyman. They needed a war to fight. And so they created one with marijuana, and they used racism, obviously, to get the people behind it. And so she goes on to say, you see, marijuana was a foundational part of jazz culture. Immediately following World War I, tea pads, homes for hosting pot smoking parties, started sprouting up around the country. These music-filled homes are made famous by frequent visitors like Louis Armstrong and Cab Calloway. The famous jazzmen joined a cast of young city dwellers who used small spaces to worship music, money, and the mighty meds. Mixed race mingling and liberal politics proliferated during the tea parties held in these mellow, multi-ethnic milieux. To people like Anslinger, these spaces were potent physical examples of the egalitarian impulses that were threatening to upend traditional American society. Given marijuana's association with Black and brown Americans, Anslinger realized he could advance his career and preserve America's societal status quo by pushing forward laws that ostensibly protected the public from degenerate races. So there, once again, the need to protect white people from so-called degenerate races of Black, brown, and what he says, Filipino people. So he wasted no time aligning his personal and professional interests. Anslinger paired his bigotry with political savvy and worked to paint cannabis consumption as the activity driving the new age of immorality. In the dusty halls of a dying agency, cannabis became the new culprit, the new boogeyman. You know what I'm saying? Having named a new enemy, the federal dollars began to flow in. Propagandists, yellow journalists, and political leaders helped to demonize the substance and call for criminalization of the undesirable populations who consumed it. So this even back in the day, you can see the criminalization of undesirable populations. We are still considered the undesirable populations. And that's why marijuana is still criminalized in our neighborhoods. We are not the ones benefiting from these new legalization laws. You know what I'm saying? It is Europeans, even though they use just a cannabis at the same rate as Black and brown people, they have never been criminalized for using it. Filmmakers, now flush with government funding, were quick to paint cannabis users as raping, murderous monsters. Journalists testified that cannabis consumption causes insanity, a still-cited claim that then, like now, contradicts the consensus of America's scientific and medical community. Anslinger's decades-long crusade would see the respected statesman fabricate evidence, destroy dissenters' careers, issue false reports to the Congress, and repeatedly perjure himself in court. While it would be impossible to detail all of the unethical things Anslinger did in the name of his anti-cannabis crusade, one of the most memorable occurred after he asked aides to assemble a dossier of violent crimes committed under the influence of marijuana. Anslinger presented these gore files when he was called to testify during a congressional hearing. Researchers later found that all 200 crimes detailed in the files were either completely fabricated or incorrectly attributed to marijuana. So again, he not only based his newfound fight against marijuana on racism, he used outright lies to justify it. So we see the same thing go on today. You know what I'm saying? The same thing by politicians, anti-cannabis politicians. It's not that they're anti-cannabis. They want to keep using cannabis as a reason for pulling Black and brown people over at traffic stops and searching their cars and getting money out of them. You know what I'm saying? This is what this is all about. But Anslinger's unscientific claims, he did everything in his power to discredit them. In one notable event, New York City Mayor Fiorella LaGuardia commissioned the New York Academy of Medicine to conduct a 5-year study on the effects of smoking marijuana. The results of this study contradicted claims that cannabis caused violent crimes, the corruption of children, and an inevitable addition to morphine, heroin, or cocaine. Instead, the 220-page report found marijuana use results in laughter, drowsiness, and increased feelings of relaxation, disinhibition, and self-confidence. It even suggests it might be used to help cure alcoholism and other serious drug addictions. In 1944, the LaGuardia Committee concluded that the publicity concerning the catastrophic effects of marijuana smoking in New York City is unfounded and recommended repealing existing anti-marijuana laws. Anslinger threw LaGuardia's report out. And so even in 1944, they were saying it's fucking pseudo to say these marijuana laws are not based in any type of real scientific evidence. But Anslinger threw it out and disregarded all scientific evidence, the same way they still do now with their classification of, what's a Schedule I drug and all of that. So this wasn't the only time Anslinger lied when the recommendations issued by experts didn't go his way. In 1942, he asked the American Medical Association to weigh in on a proposed marijuana ban. When 29 of the AMA's 30 representatives objected to the ban, Anslinger testified before Congress that the AMA's findings were unscientific. Anslinger's callous disregard of scientific study became a hallmark of America's war on drugs, and similar efforts still continue even decades after his death. In one notable Anslinger-inspired incident, President Richard Nixon set about destroying the career of Raymond Schaefer, a lifelong friend and the former Republican governor of Pennsylvania, solely because Schaefer Commission recommended the decriminalization of marijuana. And that's just a picture of, of Richard Nixon, who they consider the founder of the America's war on drugs. But as we see, we should attribute that to Harry Anslinger. he just picked up where he left off, but both of them were white supremacists, and both of them were devils in every sense of the word. And just think about how many lives they have ruined, and how many lives they have actually are responsible for killing, and how many families they destroyed due to these laws that were not based in science, but based in white supremacy. And so again, research is based off of Natalie Papilion's research. She is the founder and executive director of the Equity Organization, a national non-for-profit that's working towards a just and effective and equitable approach to criminal justice and drug policy reform. So, you know, that's the bill. It just goes to show that when like the criminalization of cannabis, coupled with the militarization of America's police, and we see how the war on drugs has affected our community, and how people have had their lives ruined over, you know, just even being in possession of cannabis. And we see that it comes from white supremacy and a white supremacist named Harry Anslinger. And the fact that they have not legalized it on a federal level, and the fact that states still have this, still haven't, most states still haven't legalized it in some form, shows you that they are still propagating white supremacy. And you know, that's just what it is. And so we have to call it for what it is. But that's the build. If you want to research more, you know what I'm saying? There's definitely a lot of information out there about this subject. Peace to the gods, peace to the earth, peace to all the civilized people. I'm out.